Mega Man games have been delighting players since as far back as late 1987 with the first Mega Man on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was a challenging mess, but its sequel, Mega Man 2, is still considered one of the best in the series, but come on, what game out there is perfect in its first iteration, and... Anyway, Mega Man is in the upper echelon of recognizable video game characters, right up there with Mario, Link, and Pac-Man. So when you hear the name Mega Man, you sit up and take notice. One of the most notable names behind Mega Man, and the one you'll often see attached to it, is Keiji Inafune. In fact, most people consider him to be the father of Mega Man, when the reality is the only thing he did for the first game was design a few minor enemy characters and Elec Man, one of the game's several bosses. He also did the Japanese box art and promotional illustrations, some in-game animations and pixel art, but the point is he was attached to the art.
He may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy.
Hell, even Inafune himself clarified this back at the Tokyo Game Show 2007. Quote, "I'm often called the father of Mega Man, but actually his design was already created when I joined Capcom," he explained. My mentor, Capcom senior member Akira Kitamura, who was the designer of the original Mega Man, had a basic concept of what Mega Man was supposed to look like, so I only did half of the job in creating him." Unquote. In other words, he did what every game artist ever is paid to do, design characters based on someone else's specifications. Yet, this perception of Inafune as the father of Mega Man persists to this day. Sometime in late 2010, Inafune announced on his blog that he'd be leaving Capcom, and so he did, launching Concept in December of that same year. If the name Concept sounds familiar to you, keep it in mind because Inafune has a hard time escaping the past and what made him popular. Not because he feels like he needs to, but because he doesn't want to. Concept didn't really do that great, which is why in August 2013, Inafune launched a Kickstarter for a game called Mighty No. 9, meant to be the spiritual successor to the Mega Man series. At the time, Capcom wasn't treating the Mega Man franchise very well, so people were thirsty for some of that old school Mega Man action. It took 3 whole years to release in 2016, and the collective response to the game from critics and players alike was a loose shrug and a meh. Even better, Ben Judd, Inafune's agent and translator, thought the delay and lukewarm end product was because they had to create a ton of ports, and that they had underestimated the workload the project would require. So you're telling me, in the 3+ years Mighty No. 9 was in development, no one sat back in their chair, analyzed the workload, and said, this is a bit too much for us, maybe we should hire some more people. I mean, if there was even a glimmer of a doubt that you could make a lot of the ports in a way that wouldn't delay your finished product, or that the Kickstarter goals you came up with would be too much workload, maybe you shouldn't have offered them! Anyway, with the recent announcement for Mega Man 11 supposedly launching this year in 2018, I thought it was a good time to go back to look at Mighty No. 9 in retrospect. Power up your buster and practice your slide. We're diving headfirst into this review of Mighty No. 9. Mighty No. 9 is a 2D action platformer that follows the adventures of Beck, with the help of Call, who must chase after and save the other robot masters, Mighty Numbers, who've mysteriously gone haywire. Meanwhile, people think that Dr. Dr. Blackwell, might be behind all the chaos. If you've played a Mega Man game and absorbed even a tiny bit of the plot, you've basically got a pretty good idea of what Mighty No. 9 brings to the table here. It plays typical of games in the genre. Beck runs, jumps, shoots, hops platform to platform, and that's the bulk of the gameplay. While Mega Man learns to slide after a few games, Beck can dash, which not only serves as your primary travel method, but can also be used as, and you're often expected to use it as, a tool to evade attacks or obstacles. Like Mega Man games, you get a choice of how you want to tackle the game. After the intro stage, you have free reign, but not every stage plays nice. Personally, I usually start with the fire guy, pyrogen, and then work my way around to what's weak to what weapon I just acquired, but I've seen lots of people suggest that the gun guy, battalion, should go first. Whatever you decide to go with first, once you acquire the blade weapon from Brandish, that's what you'll be using for 90% of the game. If Brandish and Brandish Beck look familiar, well, that's because it's fucking Zero. Are you finally seeing a pattern here? I sure hope so. The game itself is very straightforward in terms of gameplay, but it takes a bit more from Mega Man X than it does from Mega Man, which says that Inafune probably preferred the X series. It's hard to tell since the X series is basically just a better, more smoother Mega Man experience, and that just seems to be what they were aiming for here overall. In terms of the game's graphics, it's not like Mighty No. 9 is a huge slouch here. I've only played the PC version, so I can't vouch for any of the other versions, but the graphic quality and art style are both satisfactory. It's not ugly, but it's not exactly going to be winning any awards, and especially when there are mobile games coming out with better graphics. Though I do take issue with the robot models. Some of them, like Beck and Pyrogen, look like they've got those long gorilla arms, especially in contrast to the humans in the game. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The designs are really ugly. To think, people actually wanted Beck in Smash Brothers. The music is mediocre as well. There's just not much to say about it here. The tracks never really hit it out of the ballpark, but they aren't horrific either. At worst, some of the tracks just don't fit properly, like whoever was doing the music also underestimated his workload and decided to just go for generic guitar riffs added to MIDI music for most of the tracks. There was a lot of potential squandered across the entire game because I assume what was left of the budget was wasted on top-shelf booze when the development team realized that their game was going to be mind-numbingly average and gave up, which might explain why the finished product just doesn't feel finished. Boy, do I have a laundry list of things off about this game. Let's start with one of the most obvious things you'll notice if you're a fan of Mega Man. The level design is inconsistent at best, or awful at worst. For example, in Pyrogen's stage, late in the level, these towers fall from the background and impact the foreground. Instead of simply taking damage you can move on, like you might in a Mega Man game, these are instant death. Even if you touch the sides, you die. This sort of level design is consistent through a lot of the game's stages, punishing you with instant or inevitable death for small mistakes, or for things that you just don't even see coming. The enemy placement also has a huge hand in this, often randomly placed and failing to be meaningful. The game unabashedly takes a lot of concepts from Mega Man, and this is where the spiritual successor part comes in, but Mighty No. 9 also fails when it attempts to differentiate itself from Mega Man. Most enemies aren't defeated traditionally, as in you need to knock them into a state where you can dash through them to absorb them. This refills weapon energy, gives points, and adds to your tally at the end of the level, but the process gets boring fast, forcing you to stop and go constantly. Mighty No. 9 is the rush hour traffic jam of action platformers. You'll quickly find yourself avoiding enemies just to get to the boss fight at the end of the stage because there's very little benefit to actually stopping to destroy enemies. One of the central focuses of the game is the rock paper scissors style weapon system that Mega Man games are famous for. Each boss is weak to a specific weapon, though some weapons also have a mild effectiveness against bosses that they aren't typically meant for. For example, Cryosphere's freeze weapon does damage over time and slows down most of the bosses, giving you better time to react to their movement patterns. This in itself isn't a big deal, but when they're in Beck's hands, they're boring as hell. Only 3 of the weapons are any useful outside of their boss fights. That's Brandish, Battalion, and Cryosphere. Aviator has some use as well, but it's mostly because it's required to get through some of the late game's many death traps. The game tries desperately to make the other ones relevant, but you can get through 95% of the game with just those 3 and never touch Aviator until late game. If we remove ourselves from all the things Mighty No. 9 copied from other games and judge it objectively based on its own merits, what you come out with on the other side is a mediocre action platformer. All it merely proves is that Inafune is simply not capable of creating quality video game titles when he's not kept on that short Capcom leash. Not to say that Capcom is angelic or anything, but the difference in quality between your average Mega Man title under Inafune during his Capcom years and Mighty No. 9 is like night and day. So the only thing missing from this equation is Capcom. Inafune had plenty of money, plenty of time, and plenty of people, I assume. Yet the game that should have taken all the good things across several generations of Mega Man games falls flat because they fail to implement all the things that made Mega Man games such solid entries. Good graphics, good level design, fun weapons, interesting boss designs, so on and so forth. As an aside, this game has been shrouded with controversy. As an example, the game generated almost $4 million from the Kickstarter and no doubt had money invested into it from other sources. Then, instead of simply focusing on Mighty No. 9 and making sure it was a good game, they launched two other projects: the disastrous Red Ash, the Indelible Legend Kickstarter, which failed to meet its 800,000 goal by a huge margin, and the campaign for a kids animated series based off of Mighty No. 9. I probably don't have to tell you that this pissed off a lot of people, obvious by Red Ash's lack of support, especially since it made it seem like Inafune was merely trying to use Mighty No. 9 in any way possible to fatten his own wallet. I think they were expecting the game to do much better than it did in regards to the animated series, because when Mighty No. 9 released to mixed reviews, it seems like they scrambled to cancel the project before they spent too much money on it. Currently, Mighty No. 9 is $20 on Steam, but I wouldn't even recommend it at that price to even the most diehard Mega Man fan. If you can nab it at $10, including the cost of the Ray expansion, which is mysteriously more fun than the base game, I'd say it's worth it at that point. Considering it's only a few years old at this point, you might be waiting a while for that, but considering the game's overwhelming mediocrity, you don't want to rush to own this game either. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you want more Chunky Beef, hit that subscribe button or follow me on social media to know when the newest things drop. Links in the description below. See you next time.